Ron Zimmerman's Rawhide Kid is back, baby. And this time, he's bringing some friends to the party. Given the anger and controversy surrounding our previous installment, the Rawhide Kid Max series, I am not sure why 2003's series got a sequel. From my perspective, the Max miniseries wasn't a bad read, but all of the talk about it at the time of publication was fairly negative. The comic book industry does a pretty great job of hiding its publication numbers, so I don't know if that book sold well at all. What's more, I don't know if people actually liked it at the time, and if the haters were just a very vocal minority. I don't know if people bought it in order to see what the hate was all about, like I ended up doing 20 years later. I don't know if Zimmerman had some kind of contractual thing that guaranteed him a sequel, even if it would take Marvel 7 years to finally do it. But the 4-issue sequel was released in 2010. Zimmerman returns as our writer, but this time the book is drawn by Howard Chaykin and colored by Edgar Delgado. Gone are the hard, sketchy lines and dark inks of John Severin. Now we have the bright, vibrant colors of Delgado and the thick, chunky line work of Howard Chaykin. I won't lie, listener, I do not care much for Chaykin's artwork. In general, all of his men have these huge, swollen, lantern-sized jaws like big, meaty squares, and his women look intentionally cheesecake-y. For a lot of people, this isn't a problem, but it's just never sat well with me for some reason. I did find an amazing quote from Chaykin during my research, explaining why you don't see him do a lot of superhero comics, and I think it also explains why his women look so pin-up-y. Quoting Chaykin, "A problem for me was that by the time I became a professional, I lost any interest whatsoever in superhero comics. I'm not a horror guy, and I didn't know what the hell to do. What I wanted to draw is guys with guns, guys with swords, and women with big tits, and that was the extent of my interest in comics at the time." End quote. And, in his defense, if you want over-the-top sexualized women, then yeah, Chaykin is really good at it. And if you like your men square-jawed and beefy, then he's great. But when I saw that he was going to be the artist drawing this series, I braved myself to be annoyed. Instead, I found myself to be pleasantly surprised. Chaykin's pages are filled with detail. They do look like they were digitally produced to me, which may be a side effect of the coloring, but they also have a level of, clean sketchiness to me. I look at a close-up of the Rawhide Kid, and you can tell that there is a hand drawing those rough, uneven eyebrows. They are not the perfected line that a lot of digital artists have when they are working. Delgado's colors are bright and lovely as well. He colors the outline of a shape with that color, kind of like a cartoon, so Rawhide's red hair is outlined with a darker shade of red, which makes it pop off the page even more. Where Severin's artwork felt rough, dirty, and realistic, Chaykin's artwork feels detailed, clean, and really polished. It's like two completely different worlds. Both of them are honestly good, just for completely different reasons. This miniseries also sees a publication change. The world of comic books had grown up a little bit between 2003 and 2010, and the topic of a gay character was a much less controversial one than it used to be. As such, this series is not part of the adult-aimed Max line. This is just a normal, standard Marvel comic book. That seems like a small thing, but it does go to show the kind of ground that Marvel had covered since the Max release, and the confidence that they had in releasing a sequel series. So let's ride, y'all! My name is Ben, and this here is Comic Book Breakdown episode 19.8, Rawhide Kid and the Sensational Seven. Rawhide rides into the town of Tombstone at the start of this series, and he immediately goes to the sheriff's office, expecting to find the Earp Brothers, Wyatt, and Morgan. Instead, he finds the town in a riot-sized fistfight and Annie Oakley locked up in jail. And yeah, I do mean a fictionalized version of the real-world person, Annie Oakley. Turns out that with the Earps gone, locking herself in jail was the only way that Annie could protect herself from the amorous advances of the town's menfolk. While that sounds like a solid weekend to Rawhide, he can understand Annie's reticence. After a quick bath to clean herself up, Annie explains why the Earps are gone over a bottle of Chardonnay provided by the Rawhide Kid. She came to town in order to hook up with Doc Holliday, but Doc had left for Cheyenne and the Earps were already headed out of town. Seems they had caught one of Christophe Pike's Comancheros, and they were leaving in order to extradite him back to Mexico. Rawhide's eyes thin at this. Christophe Pike? He's still alive and walking? Oh yeah, Annie says. Haven't you crossed paths with them before? Rawhide then lists off the various Pikes that he has killed, including Crisco, Cisco, Castro, Christo's cousins Cresco and Crasbo. Dedicated casual listeners may remember that Cisco Pike was the main bad guy of our last series and our last episode, but that's actually a fun connection. There's something absolutely ridiculous that I love about the names Cresco and Craspo. For as much as Zimmerman misses with the comedy for me, this one actually hits pretty solid. Rawhide guesses that the extradition was actually a trap for the Earps, and Annie confirms. They did make it to Fort Pecos, and they got locked up. Seems that they have been imprisoned with, quote, the dirtiest, meanest, stoned crazy, old cork poppin', jug swilling drunkard this side of President Grant, end quote. Why we need to know that, I don't know, but okay. Thank you for the information, Annie. It does allow us to nicely transition over to the Earps, meet this old man, and watch them fight for a bit. The old man spends the entire scene mocking the pair of lawmen, riling them up until they start to fight each other. Once they do, he just sits back to watch and drink from his flask. In the fort above them, we meet our dastardly villain, Christophe Pike, and his sidekick/henchman, a small guy named Shorty. He isn't a little person, he's just a short guy. Yeah, creative naming in this one. As with Cisco in the last series, scenes with Christo play out much the same. Christo is the only competent bad guy in the group, and his henchmen are stupid and generally annoy him. And me. It feels a lot like an 80s cartoon villain power dynamic, actually, with the over-the-top bad guy having someone smaller than him that he can smack around when he's being stupid. I think that it's meant to be funny, and if that's the case, I am unfortunately going to have to report that I never once chuckled at Christo and Shorty's interactions. Back in Tombstone, Rawhide decides that he needs to rescue the Earps before Christo kills them. And while he could do it on his own, it would probably be better to have some help. So he's going to round up every straight-shooting gunfighter that he can find. Is Annie with him? She thinks about it for a second before answering. Yeah, I guess it beats staying locked up here. But how are they going to get out of town considering all of the fighting out there and the men who have been chasing her? Rawhide smiles. Well, don't you worry about it. The mere presence of the Rawhide Kid is honestly enough to quell the fighting, but then they do run into the men who have been trying to get their hands on Annie. Rawhide demands an apology for her, these men rudely resist, and then he beats the ever-loving crap out of them, both with his fists and his shooting. Annie is super impressed by his skills. They stop by the telegraph station to call for some backup, and then prepare to ride out of town. Annie warns Rawhide that the town is only going to get worse once they're gone, and there's no lawman present. Rawhide thinks not. That telegram that he sent was to an old friend, and we witnessed the arrival of a flaming skull-headed horseman. His black horse glows with a fiery light, its own eyes burning with the fires of hell. "Tombstone has a new sheriff," he cries out, "and his name is Ghost Rider." Annie's jaw drops. She thought that he was just a myth. She's got a lot to learn then, Rawhide says, sliding his sunglasses on. And they have a team to assemble. Yeah! I was initially very perplexed seeing this Ghost Rider, because this rider is modeled after the modern Ghost Rider, not the Western one. The classic Western version of the Ghost Rider is a human man dressed in an all-white costume, riding a white horse, and wielding a rifle. It's honestly a great, simple design. But it just doesn't compare to the sheer badassery of the modern Ghost Rider. The modern Ghost Rider is a skull-faced, flame-headed spirit of vengeance, capable of transforming whatever they ride into a hellfire-powered vehicle capable of miracles or damnation. The version that Zimmerman gives us here is actually wrong for this era. But then I remembered that there is a Western-era Spirit of Vengeance. Ghost Rider Trail of Tears was a 6-issue miniseries that was released in 2007, which starred a former Confederate soldier named Travis Parham, who investigates the horrible fate of his friend Caleb, a freed slave who has gone on to become a spirit of vengeance. A Ghost Rider. The rider that Zimmerman shows us here does not feel like Caleb, who was very much played more like a monster from a horror movie. He was ominous, spooky, threatening, and deadly, mutilating those who wronged him in quite disgusting and graphic ways. Zimmerman's rider doesn't have that same vibe at all, but then again, most of Zimmerman's characters aren't going to feel like their normal selves. We'll see that in the next issue. However, since the Ghost Rider is a mantle that more than one person can carry at a time, I tend to think that this is a different character, a Ghost Rider that is unique to Zimmerman's version of the Sensational Seven. If you're wondering why I didn't cover Trail of Tears in this streak of Western episodes, well, honestly, I forgot it existed. I have Trail of Tears housed over in my Ghost Rider collection, as it is less of a Western story and more of a Ghost Rider story that happens to be set in the Wild West. I have to admit that thinking about it does pique my interest, though. It's been a while since I reread that era of Ghost Rider. Maybe we'll hit up Ghosty sometime soon. Let me know if you folks would be interested in hearing about some Ghost Rider. Anyway, we've closed out our first issue. The second is focused around Rawhide and Annie collecting their allies. This leads them to the town of Deadwood, where we recruit Doc Holliday, Kid Colt, and the Two-Gun Kid. Just outside of town, Rawhide then adds Red Wolf and his animal familiar, Lobo, to the posse as well. Of course, none of them are your standard interpretation of those characters. This is Zimmerman's version of the Marvel West, and so everybody gets a slight update. Doc Holliday remains much as his historical legends say he is. He is a card player, a cheater, a drinker, an expert marksman, sick with tuberculosis, and unerringly loyal to Wyatt Earp. When Rawhide explains that their mission is to rescue the Earps, Doc is immediately ready to drop whatever he is doing here to help. But we also see it established that Annie and Doc are a couple at the moment. Annie actually killed the last woman that Doc was sleeping with, so that he would be free to sleep with her. I doubt that it's love, but it's a fun ride for now. Kid Colt is found in a bordello, having been entertained by at least 5 women at a time since his arrival. He has actually been more of a problem than a blessing for the madam, who Rawhide is friends with. He invites Colt along on the mission, and Colt actually turns him down. He never really liked the Earps. But when Rawhide tells him that Annie Oakley is riding with him, Colt changes his tune. Even the prospect of having to steal her from Doc Holliday doesn't bother him. I actually like Colt's dislike of the Earps here. Remember, Kid Colt is a :O outlaw, and they are lawmen, so it's just natural that they would have a problem. This is cats and dogs over here. Otherwise, Zimmerman writes Colt to be crude, crass, an ungodly womanizer, and maybe more than a bit dumb, or At least he's dumb when compared to the Rawhide Kid. I kind of guess that his new sexual appetites and prowess are the reason that he is called Kid Colt in this version, because that joke seems right up Zimmerman's alley, and I kind of hate that I think it's a little bit funny. The Two Gun Kid's changes actually play up the dichotomous nature of his origins. This version of Matt Hawkins is renamed Matt Leibowitz, although he is still a lawyer from the East Coast who now moonlights as a gunfighter. This initially feels like an odd change, as it's just a last name change, but we also have another change to complement it. When Two Gun volunteers to join the party, Kid Colt says that he can only come along if his shooting has improved. Colt then tosses a bottle into the air and Matt fires off several rounds, shooting the other men in the bordello and completely missing the bottle. But he gets to come along because Rawhide says so. A scattershot is not only useful in a firefight, but nothing scares the bad guys like a masked gunfighter, he says. These changes, making Matt Jewish and making Matt a scattershot, go hand in hand, although it doesn't seem like it. First off, making Matt Jewish gives Zimmerman another minority to make jokes about or with. So instead of just making fun of Rawhide sexuality, we now get jokes about Jewish people added in. For example, when the team goes to recruit Red Wolf, they are walking through the desert, and Matt jokes that he must be adopted, because the Jews were desert wanderers, and he hates this experience, but ha ha ha. More importantly, if Matt was the son of wealthy parents who could afford to get him educated enough to become a lawyer, or who were connected enough to get him hired into a lawyer's office, then it's likely that Matt would not have a lot of time to practice his gunfighting. He is a part-timer in this world, and so now it shows in his shooting. Most of the time with the Rawhide Kid, Zimmerman is challenging the stereotypes surrounding gay men, which is at least an intelligent bit of writing. This bit with Two Gun doesn't work nearly as well, in my opinion, although I do like the scattershot / part-time gunfighter idea. That's actually kind of a cool cause and effect thing. With Red Wolf, Zimmerman continues to explore stereotypes. In a lot of Western media, indigenous peoples tend to fall under one of two categories. They're either savage killers from an alien culture that's threatening to Europe / white culture, or they are noble savages, stately diplomats trying to keep a home for their people, or brave warriors defending themselves, or beautiful princesses. Ostrander and Zimmerman try their best to write Red Wolf as more layered than that. He is clearly intelligent in both of their versions, but he is also a skilled fighter and, if necessary, a killer. Ostrander's version had lost his hope for the future. He could see no world shared with the whites worth living in. However, he ended that story by finding some measure of happiness with Ghost Wind Rider. Maybe you have to add love and happiness into the world, rather than just remove bad people from it. Zimmerman's Red Wolf feels like he's beyond the conflict between his people and the whites. Like Rawhide, he is smarter than anyone else in the room, utterly confident in his abilities and skills, and he doesn't care to let anyone say otherwise. I remember being told in middle school that indigenous peoples recognized the addictive and deadly effects of tobacco already when Europeans began to colonize the North American continent, and saw only a new form of profit. Red Wolf's investigative paper is a nod to that idea, and Zimmerman mentions him writing a thesis for Harvard to highlight that this isn't just some dude talking the talk. He is writing to one of the most recognized schools in the country. His intelligence is beyond doubt here. That's why I dislike his motivation for helping the Rawhide Kid so much. In Blaze of Glory, that version of Rawhide sold Red Wolf on getting involved by promising him the chance to kill white men. And Zimmerman's Rawhide does the same. So I suppose I should plod the consistency between iterations, but, that's it? Zimmerman goes to all of this trouble to make Red Wolf into a modern-day Renaissance man, a thinker, and the best part of him to appeal to is his need for revenge? I don't even mind the hating white people thing, I get it. America did some absolutely terrible things to its indigenous population, and it still does in many ways, so I can understand Red's dislike. I just want him to have more personality than just that one character trait. Hell, Zimmerman went to all this work to give him more of a personality than that. It's just like a solid left turn in his character work, and it throws me for a loop when I read this. I think the thing that's really tripping me up here, and let me explore my own sense of unconscious racism and bias for a second, I'll never get over these ideas unless I confront them, is that Red Wolf feels like he has moved beyond being an angry indigenous person. He's gotten an education, he is writing science papers, and remember, Red Wolf was raised in white society as part of his origin. I read this scene as him having accepted the social trappings of white American society. Or, to say it in short, I guess, he feels very white in this scene. But Red Wolf is still drawn in his indigenous clothing, and he is investigating indigenous concerns. And clearly he still carries some anger over what was done to his people, because he is willing to kill in their name. So his background hasn't been forgotten or expunged from his character in this scene. In fact, the character of Red Wolf was originally created in order to bridge the two worlds of America's indigenous peoples and its European settlers. And this version of Red Wolf honestly does that. He embodies both of those cultures so much that it actually just makes my head spin. One second he feels European, and then the next he feels like Apache, and then he says something that feels European again. It feels like I am getting some reading whiplash, but when I think about it, I actually think that it's some really good character writing. I like this version of Red Wolf. I actually like him more than the version that we got in Blaze of Glory, and I love Blaze of Glory, so that's saying something. I do want to take a moment to recognize the fact that Red Wolf is a character designed by white dudes who grew up in New York City, being written by another white dude who is being criticized by me, another white dude. I don't know about the other gentlemen involved in this whole thing, but I am certain that I don't know enough about Apache culture to say whether this rendition of Red Wolf is good or bad. All I can speak for is my own personal tastes and try to unpack my own biases and assumptions. And for me, this character works.
But wait, Ben,
you say,
that is only 6 people, not 7. This book is called The Sensational Seven, so who is the 7th gunman?
We meet number 7 at the start of issue 3, and it is a murderous, horny, ugly cuss named Billy the Kid. We actually meet him as he hits on a married woman, realizes that she is married, shoots her husband, and then he hits on her again because a widow is fair game. So, this guy's classy. Our band of heroes watch this happen, and they're kinda torn about how they want to handle him. Annie, on the one hand, doesn't like him at all, but he reminds Doc Holliday of a wet, poisoned rat. He's funny, ugly, and sad. Two Gun thinks that he could make a killing defending him in the courts, while Kid Colt wants to save the taxpayers some money and just put him in the ground now. But the Rawhide Kid says that they need a bloodthirsty little savage on this job, and so he assigns Doc Holliday as his handler. Billy actually has no interest in helping out when he is asked, despite how legendary and awesome our cast is. So Doc Holliday beats the crap out of him, promises that they're all going to testify against him for murdering that man, and he will thank them for the privilege. Then he literally drags Billy by his hair after kicking him in the balls over to the group. So, he is a lovely fellow and a welcome addition to the team. At Christophe Pike's fort, we see that the Earp Brothers are still at each other's throats. In fact, Morgan is so over this old man and his brother that he will do anything to get out of this cell. Hang him now, whatever it takes. This amuses Christo a lot, and he offers to let Morgan out on one condition: that he join Christo's gang, do whatever he says, and be a real bad guy. Which is actually 3 conditions. But Morgan agrees to them. He doesn't even fake agree so that Christo will let him out and then he could betray him. No, he just falls to Christo's feet, hugging them. Wyatt cannot believe this. But the old man thinks that it's actually a good idea. He promises Christo that even drunk, he is one hell of a shot. But Christo isn't interested. The old man is a critical part of his plan, so he is staying right where he is. As Morgan, Christo, and Shorty leave, planning to get Morgan a new bad guy outfit, he suggests a new name for himself, something like the No Good Kid. And Christo chuckles. You know what? You know what, guy? That is so dumb that he likes it. As the sun settles, we find Rawhide's troop camping for the night. They're swapping war stories, all of them larger than life. Two Gun tells them about the time that he traveled through time and met this group called the Avengers, and everybody's like, oh god, this story again? But Red Wolf says that scientists are beginning to believe that not only is time travel possible, but there might even be life on other planets, or even other galaxies. So, once again, Red Wolf is the smartest man on the prairie. That's kind of cool to see. After the sun sets and most of the gang has gone to sleep, Matt and Rawhide are left sitting up, chatting. Apparently, Rawhide tells Matt that his clothing makes him seem gay, especially the little leather mask. God, he says, I'm gonna have to change my whole look. But why? Rawhide asks. If you like what you wear, then wear that. What makes a man tough, what makes a man, isn't how he dresses. Not being afraid of what anyone else thinks about you is what makes a man. Standing your ground, being comfortable with who you are. If you can do that, then you're tough. Rawhide learned that lesson the hard way when he was a kid, and we flash back to his childhood once again. We get to see a half-drunk father yelling at his son, trying to teach him how to shoot. Johnny isn't interested in shooting guns, though, he protests. He wants to read poetry and travel the world and study the arts. Dad doesn't care much for any of that sissy talk. When Johnny finally does fire the gun, he misses the hanging bottles that are his targets completely. His mother, Sadie, tries to defend him, but Dad punches her across the face. Dad grabs Johnny's gun, shoots the 6 bottles without a single thought, and then dumps the gun and fresh bullets at Johnny's feet. That's how a real man shoots, he says. Then he grabs Sadie's wrist and pulls her after him. Shooting like that always makes him frisky. She apologizes to Johnny as they leave. Johnny loads the gun. He'll never be as good as you, Dad, huh? Well, we'll see. He fires off 6 shots. And this time, one of them hits. After that, we're told that Johnny left the farm, and he never returned home. He began to travel the world, adventuring and training. He eventually got word that his mother stepped on a rake and brained herself, while his father sold the farm and went on to become a successful wandering drunkard. In the modern era, Matt tries to reciprocate the sharing and tell his own rough childhood story. But you know what? Rawhide thinks that he can finally fall asleep. He starts to prep his bedroll, completely uninterested in Matt's background. This obviously annoys Matt, who suggests that Rawhide might be incredibly self-interested because he thinks that he's the most interesting person in the world. He means it as an insult, but Rawhide says that it ain't even that deep. He's the Rawhide Kid. And Chaykin's artwork when he delivers this line makes him look like an outright psychopath. But this is the kind of line that someone with some charisma could sell. If this scene was done by an actor, I actually think that it could work. Without it though, Rawhide just comes off as a narcissistic a-hole. So while I do think up to this point Zimmerman's writing has improved, as I've actually quietly chuckled at this point in these 2 issues, it hasn't quite really grown the way it needs to in order to be a successful comic book yet. Anyways, at Christo's fort, he welcomes a cohort of 7 gunfighters, each one of them meant to be a match for one of Rawhide's gang. We actually aren't introduced to them here in this issue, which is actually kind of a nice mystery. but I am going to introduce them here for the ease of story presentation. We have Rawhide's counterpart, Kid Cabo. Red Wolf's is Grizzly Johnson with his bear ally, Brownie. Billy's is Kid Dead, who sure looks like a zombie to me. Doc Holliday has Le Saber Kid, who is actually a repeat villain from the Max miniseries. Two Gun Kid faces down the Lone Ninja. Annie Oakley is paired off against Honeybee, and Kid Colt has Bloody Ivan. And in the background of the scene, we have Morgan Earp in an apron sweeping the floor. Way to crush being a bad guy, Morgan. Christo promises this collection of goons fame and notoriety after they kill their counterparts, cementing them as legends of the West. Wait, that's their payment? Like, they aren't even actually getting paid to do this? They're literally doing this for exposure? What a bunch of idiots. This scene is witnessed by Lobo, Red Wolf's ally, although I don't know how that is possible because the scene happens inside the fort, which is inside an exterior wall, and there's no windows, and Lobo wouldn't have had access to it, but okay, sure. I mean, he's a wolf that communicates with people. Why can't he also see through walls, I guess? The wolf reports back to Red Wolf, and he then passes on the warning to the posse. Even the Rawhide Kid is impressed by the talent that has been gathered against them. This is a mighty group of people. Billy, however, has a hard time believing that Red Wolf can actually understand Lobo, or that the animal can recognize people by name. He thought for sure that he was the stupidest person here until he saw this. Y'all are idiots. So Lobo pounces on Billy, pins him to the ground, and then barks in his face, teeth inches away from his eyes. Satisfied, the wolf eventually backs up. Billy, somehow, manages to not wet himself and then apologizes to Lobo. He adds that Mr. Colt has a loose rein strap on his horse, which was spotted by Lobo. You know what? Oh, Billy's head hurts. Can they just go? And despite the odds against them, and our cast even being aware of the odds against them, and Rawhide being impressed by those odds, Rawhide inspires them by calling them the Sensational Seven, and they ride off to combat. Like, that's it. They are nervous, and they are scared, and he's like, "Don't worry, y'all, we got this." Why? 'Cause we're the Sensational Seven. And the group is actually like, well, hey, that don't sound too bad. Let's do this. I don't know if this is meant to be funny or so stupid that it's funny, but it just feels stupid. Like, it's one thing for these characters to not have a lot of depth to them, because they don't, and honestly, up to this point, I'm kind of fine, but we reach a point where they actually have an emotional need to be inspired, and the best we get is Rawhide going, "Be inspired, y'all!" And it works. And it works somehow. It just, I just don't get it. Issue 4 sees the Seven storm Christo's fort. According to Rawhide's plan, the Comancheros run at the sight of the gunfighters, which will then leave them to face down their outlaw counterparts. And that is what happens. Honestly, the majority of this issue is our heroes showing up at the fort and then killing their counterparts. Some of those moments are funny, and some of them are stupid, but mostly they are fast. Because once that portion of the fighting is done, Christophe Pike finally faces our gang. But he has Wyatt Earp and the old man as hostages. Doc Holliday is ready to face Pike, but Christo isn't worried about Doc. He's noticed that the Rawhide Kid is awfully quiet. Isn't he? The Rawhide Kid sneers, and then he tells the others to stand down. Red Wolf looks at him confused. Why? Who is this old man to you? The old man takes over now, rattling off a series of insults at Rawhide, ending with him introducing himself as Jimmy Bart, Rawhide's dad. Christo smiles confidently. "You killed my family, Rawhide. Now I'm gonna kill yours." It's too bad for Christo that Rawhide let go of any feelings that he had for his paw a long time ago. As far as he's concerned, his paw is already dead. Wyatt is actually the only person that he's concerned about saving here. And then Rawhide shoots both Wyatt Earp and his dad. The expression on Christo's face when he does this is pretty fantastic. And then the Rawhide Kid shoots him, too. The Sensational Seven are suitably impressed, assuming that Wyatt and his dad are still alive. And Rawhide is like, yeah, I just creased them so that they would drop and I'd have a clear shot. They're gonna be fine. And hey, they are alive. And Wyatt and Jimmy B are impressed by Rawhide shooting, which is actually a good bit of character growth for Jimmy. He still rattles off a string of additional insults, which Rawhide says, Dad, that's gotta go, man. Doc Holliday then grabs Jimmy by his overalls and drags him off panel in order to beat him up like he has been doing to Billy the Kid on and off throughout this book. While that's happening, Morgan runs over to Wyatt. You know, he was just about to join that fight when the door blew open, right? And it smacked him in the head and it just knocked him out cold. Couldn't do a thing about it. You sold me out and joined the bad guys, Wyatt replies. But you're also my brother, and he still loves him. The pair hug, and Rawhide figures that if they can bury the hatchet, well then maybe there's some hope for him and his father. While all the good fuzzy emotions are happening, Billy the Kid has stolen a horse and is making good his escape. But as he rides off, he notices a figure approaching. Is that you, Pat Garrett? For those unfamiliar, Pat Garrett was a sheriff and a bartender, and he is the man who killed Billy the Kid. Like, for realsies, killed Billy the Kid. So, whatever. Rawhide says that he's got a steamer boat booked for a week in Hong Kong, so he really needs to start hitting the trail. The bad guys have been beaten, the good guys have won the day, and everything seems pretty well wrapped up. So, until the next time they meet again, Sensational Seven, let's ride! I hate this ending. And not even because it's a bad ending, but just because it's the same ending that we have had every issue of this miniseries so far. That's right. Every issue of the Rawhide Kid and the Sensational Seven ends with him calling out to his allies, "Let's ride!" And again, maybe if I hadn't read these in one sitting, it would be less notable, but I did read it in one sitting, and it's super annoying and kind of unsatisfactory. I am also unsatisfied by the resolution of the old man mystery element and his relationship to the Rawhide Kid. Christo having kidnapped Rawhide's dad to use him as a hostage is actually a clever move, especially for a villain who is as dopey as Christo. Obviously it backfires on him, but that's okay too. The Pikes are meant to be silly, kinda stupid bad guys, so having him make this play makes me go, oh, this is the smart Pike. Oh, very nice. But then when it backfires, it just makes him look even more stupid, reinforcing the idea that the Pikes are probably dumb. So that's honestly okay to me as well. I am more unhappy with where Zimmerman leaves Jimmy and Rawhide's relationship. Between these two miniseries, Zimmerman has honestly painted Jimmy Bart as Rawhide's true nemesis. He not only betrayed his son emotionally and then physically beat him, but his actions are what set Rawhide on his life path. That is perfect nemesis material. But then Zimmerman suggests this idea that Rawhide should just forgive his dad and move forward, and no? I have read 4 issues now of Jimmy Bart being nothing but an absolute piece of no swearing, to the Earp Brothers, and I hate him. No swearing, forgiving that guy. He wants to be an angry drunk, then let him and leave him behind in the past where he belongs. Zimmerman tries to treat Morgan's betrayal of Wyatt as equal to Jimmy's betrayal of Rawhide, but no! Morgan has not done anything evil. He hasn't hurt his brother physically or emotionally. He's just an idiot. And by that, I mean Morgan accomplishes nothing after he joins up with Christo. He sweeps the floor. He does get a new suit, to be fair, and he almost gets killed by Grizzly Johnson, but that's it. He doesn't attack anyone. He doesn't shoot anyone. He doesn't even punch somebody. He doesn't hurt anybody. He's just a dumb idiot. And so when you forgive him, it feels okay. Jimmy, on the other hand, didn't just beat his child and his wife, he was also emotionally cruel and manipulative, and not just to Rawhide. Throughout this miniseries, Jimmy has driven the Earp brothers to fight each other, encouraged or started arguments between the two of them, and, at one point, even tricked Wyatt Earp into drinking his piss. Jimmy Bart is a no swearing, and he should be shunned by society for the rest of his days, as far as I'm concerned. The rest of the cast are a mixed bag for me. Nobody here is an outright bad character, but they have so little to do that I also can't really call them interesting characters. They are at best interesting concepts, but they don't go anywhere. This is Rawhide's story at its core, and no one else really gets any kind of work done outside of the initial changes that I described. When Rawhide says that he could have done this mission by himself, he's right. We didn't really do anything with any cast member other than him. But I won't lie, I don't really mind that we didn't get much character work done with them. This story was only 4 issues long. It's actually pretty quickly paced. Rawhide needs to recruit allies. He does. They save the day. The story ends. Bada bing, bada boom. It's over, and it's a fun adventure story. This series does not have nearly the same emotional core that the Rawhide Max miniseries did, but I won't lie, I also don't miss that emotional core here. I think the big difference between these two books is that this one is honestly just more fun. And that humor is kind of mean-spirited, and it's pretty cruel, but I guess I'm just kind of mean-spirited and cruel sometimes. Last episode's miniseries really fell flat for me in the comedy department, despite having a strong emotional core and some excellent themes, but it didn't have any likable characters. But most of this series works really well. I like most of the cast. I think Zimmerman's twists on all of their personalities are interesting twists, and the book just moves at a fast pace. Again, I actually really like this. There are also a lot less jokes centered around Rawhide's sexuality this time around. It feels just like an accepted part of his character here, and having the rest of the cast, Christophe Pike, and the Earp Brothers present in the story really allows them to provide the comedy elements, while Rawhide provides the heroism. The covers for this series are also your standard comic book Western covers. They all work, don't get me wrong, they're all good-looking covers, but they do lack that little bit of spice that the last miniseries had. The tongue-in-cheek humor of that last series is gone, and it leaves these covers feeling much less unique. This whole series actually feels much more mature in its handling of Rawhide's sexuality, actually. It isn't amazingly done, but I do think that it is better done, and that gets this book a lot of credit from me. I feel kind of bad that Zimmerman basically ran out of the comic book industry over these comics. As I've said before, these aren't amazing comics by any stretch, but they also aren't bad comics. I have certainly read worse. I was way more frustrated reading some of Chris Claremont's Fantastic Four Volume 3 or Neil Gaiman's Eternals, and those are guys who keep getting work in the industry. And, to be fair, they also have successful and highly well-regarded bodies of work outside of those specific stories, so they can take a few hits where Zimmerman had almost no body of work behind him to support these particular books. So, sometimes you take your shot, and you just miss. Which is fine. Despite his less-than-stellar body of work for Marvel, Zimmerman got to write some of the industry's coolest characters, and his TV career has remained strong since. Maybe writing comics just wasn't for him, and that's okay, at least he had the opportunity to do so. I don't know if this is going to be an ongoing feature during this streak of episodes, but I think that out of everything we've covered so far, Apache Skies is probably my single favorite story. It has a solid story, it's got some pretty good character work, and it is easily the best looking series that I've seen so far. Blaze of Glory would probably be my second best, followed by Sensational Seven, then the Rawhide Max series, and then we would have Sunset Riders last. Which is really not how I thought that this was going to shake down when I first started researching and buying these books. So that's kind of fun. It's really cool to me to come into this and get all these books and read them all and think about them for a while and have everything not go the way that I thought it would. This is fascinating. We've wrapped up Zimmerman's version of the Marvel West, and so it's time for another change. Lots of change this time. It was 2004's Amazing Fantasy series that led to my interest in Marvel's Wild Western event and set me off down this dusty trail. In it, a strange explosion has left a man named Vegas with holes in his memory, a missing sister, and a gang of criminals hunting him down. Thankfully, he seems to have gained superpowers in the process. Join me in a week for our first modern Western story in Comic Book Breakdown, episode 19.9, Amazing Fantasy, issues 13 and 14. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.